Good evening and welcome to the September 22nd, 2025 Council Committee meeting. I am Council President Kurt Knappen, Ward 3, and will be chairing this meeting. I will now do a roll call at this time. Sierra Whitted, Ward 1.
Present.
Tony Gillette, Ward 1.
Present.
Jeannie Murphy, Ward 2.
Present.
Mike Kemling, Ward 2.
Present.
Angela Steens, Ward 3.
Present.
Jacqueline Walters, Ward 4.
Present.
And Laurel Birchfield, Ward 4, is absent tonight. Next, I'd like to explain our procedures for public input. In an effort to enhance citizens' ability to present information to the governing body, anyone interested in addressing the governing body is strongly encouraged to register to speak by noon on the day of the meeting, but it is not required. Information has been posted online about how to sign up. By policy, comments are limited to 5 minutes. No person may speak more than once to any one agenda item. Only comments related to city business are permitted. Disruptive acts are not permitted as per policy statement number 7 and will not be tolerated. After you are finished speaking, please sign the form on the podium to ensure we have an accurate record of your name and address. Additionally, comments can be submitted to the entire governing body via email at governingbody@cityofshawnee.org. There are 2 items on tonight's agenda, and I want to say both of these issues tonight to me are really important. They both certainly affect Ward 3, but I think affect the entire city. And so I'm hoping for a fruitful discussion tonight and some good decisions from the council. Also really looking forward to public input if we have it. We welcome you from the audience. Don't be afraid to weigh in. And my hope is that we can get a lot of good specifics regarding the Riverview area request for a train quiet zone. And although we've dug into it, it's a much more complicated issue than you would think. So looking forward to Lauren's presentation and also discussing e-bikes. So with that said, item number 1 is a presentation on the Lake Crest Drive train crossing. City Manager Paul Kramer will kick off the discussion. Paul.
Thank you, Council President Knappen. I do hope tonight we have a good discussion on Lake Crest Drive train crossing. We've done quite a bit of work at the staff level on site visits with the railroad. Lauren's certainly dug into this a lot along with Public Works. I'd like to thank her, thank Doug Allman and his staff, Kevin Manning and his staff for looking through this. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Lauren Grashoff, our Assistant City Manager, to get us started on the discussion.
All right, good evening, council members. This is probably not the first nor the last. I know it's not the first discussion that we've had in Shawnee around our train crossings. And so I'll just briefly go over, to no surprise, resident concerns around noise. Go over just background on the railroad itself, just the authorities and regulations and rules around railroad operations and crossings. And then more detail about the Lake Crest Drive rail crossing itself, and then kind of an update on where we're at as far as contacts we've had with BNSF, doing that on-site diagnostic, and some possible alternatives there are to mitigate sound. So as noted, we did receive resident concerns earlier this year from the Riverview subdivision. They are generally along Lake Crest Drive, north of 47th Street. And so that subdivision has expressed concerns and has emailed you all as well, specific to the noise from the train horns. There are some concerns, somewhat less though, with the crossing bells at that crossing, and I'll go through kind of what is currently there. But to no surprise, train horns are loud. They're intended to be loud. They are much louder than any truck, sort of standard ambient noise that we hear commonly. Those can have potential negative impacts on people. Long-term, looking at hearing loss over a lifetime, anything typically above 45 decibels indoors or 55 decibels outdoors, generally hit sort of that initial level of annoyance, potentially activity interference. Levels beyond that, including the actual sound level itself, duration of exposure, and frequency, can create those more intense and negative psychological and physiological effects. And so going through just railroad operations and authority themselves, the U.S. Department of Transportation, the Federal Railroad Administration, or FRA, has regulatory authority over operations. The State Department of Transportation reviews public crossings for safety, and then the private railroad companies themselves operate and maintain tracks and crossings. As I mentioned, we have had numerous conversations through the years around Shawnee's rail lines and then rail crossings. We have 3 lines that are operated by Burlington Northern that actually run through Shawnee. The blue you can see is the Topeka subdivision, which we'll be talking about as part of runs through that Lake Crest crossing there, the Emporia subdivision, and then at the very southeast corner of the city, we have the Fort Scott subdivision. They are named because those are their origin locations. And the Topeka subdivision goes from Topeka to Kansas City, Kansas, in what they call their Argentine yard. There are 4 trains that run on the Topeka subdivision each day. There are on average 2 passenger trains, and the other 2 would be freight trains. There are 2 between the hours of 6 a.m. and 6 p.m., and then the other 2 are 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. You can see on the map on your screen there, these are the rail crossings that we currently have in Shawnee. The red are what are considered private crossings. So those only have access to private property. That's not, there's no city right of way or other public right of way where those cross. Typically, especially where we're looking at kind of west of Clare, those are ag properties, vacant properties. The railroads themselves basically set the rules for if they have to blow their horns at those crossings. They're also not, as mentioned, regulated by the FRA. And then we have a few private crossings, which are FRA somewhat regulated further south on our Emporia subdivision. And then we have public crossings because those cross public right of way. Those would be at grade crossings. And so they are required by federal law to sound their horns at all of those green locations. As I'll go through a little bit later, they also do currently blow at some of the private crossings as well. So federal law again requires horns to be sounded at every crossing. And those for public crossings, they generally sound 15 to 20 seconds before crossing, but they are restricted to not sounding their horns more than a quarter mile away from those crossings. Private crossings, again, are basically set by policy and procedures by the railroad operator and are not required to report to the Federal Railroad Administration. There are a number of ways to mitigate train horn noise. For public crossings, cities can eliminate or reduce train horn noise by establishing what's called a quiet zone and mitigate the increased safety risk with the absence of the horn with approved supplemental safety measures. These safety measures really vary based on what basically sort of the roadway configuration looks like, average daily trips, a lot of different things, but there are a number of basically traffic improvements, crossing improvements that can be made to implement quiet zones. Private crossings, this really basically is just between the railroad themselves and the private owners, generally requires an indemnification. And then public and private, the sort of simplest answer that we get from both the FRA, Department of Transportation, and then also the railroads is to just go ahead and close them. I think it kind of easily makes sense that when you don't have interactions with whether that's trains and people and cars, the less likely there are to be conflicts and accidents. And so you lower tremendously the risk of having conflicts with those. Just to orient us, we're really the location we're talking about tonight is at Lake Crest Drive. It is just north of 45th Street in Northwest Shawnee. And here's just a general aerial map of the area. So you see the orange road close kind of in the middle of your screen. The roadway was closed, actually gated in 2024. And so I'll go through a few photos of that, just kind of show layout of where it's currently closed. It is closed then at 43rd Street, just east of the Johnson County wastewater site there. And so there are two different property owners adjacent to Lake Crest and 43rd currently. Those are mostly used just for ag operations, and they do have some private access. We also currently still have emergency access as well as pedestrian access beyond the road closure areas. As well, just want to note there are additional private crossings in the area. See on the right-hand side of your screen, that is the Hermes Landscaping. So they do have a private crossing to their site. Trains do sound their horns there because it is an active commercial site versus what's kind of on the left-hand side of your screen, which is an ag lot, probably only has access a couple times a year. So they don't sound their horns at that western location. They do sound their horns further east at the Hermes crossing there. So as you can tell, there's really a mix of sort of land uses in the area. The railroad has been there since before this area was annexed to Shawnee, as well as all this surrounding development around it. The Riverview subdivision probably came along sort of the last of what we see for the single family development in this area, but it is a mix of ag. We've got some industrial, commercial, as well as large lot single family, and again, ag in the area. So this is just a few pictures, kind of give you a view of where we're at. This on the kind of left-hand side of your screen there is 45th Terrace and Lake Crest Drive. You are sitting a little bit up on a hill before you go north and go down an elevation to the railroad crossing. As I mentioned, gates were added on Lake Crest Drive north of 45th Terrace there. You can see on the right-hand side of your screen, there is about a 5-foot gap in that gate to allow, there currently allows pedestrian and bicycle access onto Lake Crest and 43rd further north. You're looking north, so you can see on the right-hand side of your screen, that at-grade crossing. You can tell in these next set of photos, Lake Crest and 43rd to some extent is not improved to our current roadway standards. To say it's 2 lanes is a little bit of an overstatement. Pavement width varies there. And there are what we call the 2 crossbucks included with the lights and bells, and then the gate arms. And so whenever a train is approaching the crossing there, they are required to not only sound their horns, but also these gates are activated. And so as they're approaching, if they stop on the crossing, the gates do remain down, which means the bells stay on. Unfortunately, what we have discovered through part of our talking with BNSF is that if the gates are down, we can't time out the bells. This is a federal mandate. There's no workaround for that. We can't request any sort of alleviation from that regulation. And there's also not, while we can't time out, we also can't reduce the sound level of the bells. Again, that's federally mandated. So that is not as loud as a train horn, but it is additional noise that nearby residents do hear. And so looking at, as mentioned, sometimes trains do sit on the tracks. This is fairly common because they are waiting to get into the rail yard in Kansas City, Kansas. They stop at this location because obviously restricting access to a commercial business is not a high priority for them. This crossing is currently closed. And then also, if they were to stop further west on the rail line, there's a potential that they would block the Clare Road location crossing that's currently further west. some of these trains are extremely long and could block other locations. So this is just kind of to give you an overview of kind of where we sit. The Lake Crest crossing is along just north of 47th there, kind of in the middle of the orange dot or orange circles there. You've got to the west, we've got that private crossing 1,000 feet away. The closest homes to the Lake Crest crossing are 300 feet, so very close. And then we've got also the Clara Road crossing, 1.7 miles to the west. That's just as a just straight line from just closest point to the Riverview subdivision. Obviously, there are homes that are much closer than the Riverview subdivision to that Clara Road crossing, as well as the 2 locations to the east of Lake Crest that are private crossings, but they do sound their horns. So 0.77 miles to the Hermes location and 1.2 to the Wilder Road crossing. Oh, again, looking at the Lake Crest Drive train crossing, there was an analysis done in 2018. At the time, it was determined that closure of Lake Crest Drive was not feasible or not something the city desired to undertake. And so the analysis really looked at alternatives to adding safety measures that could allow for a quiet zone to be created, but not close the road. They determined during the analysis that based on the risk score, which is a multitude of criteria, basically that they use to set a threshold. If it's below a certain score, then it's potentially eligible to be a quiet zone area. And so looking at that based on sort of the risk score and best practices, there were additional safety measures that were recommended. At the time, they were included curbed medians in the center of the roadway to relocate and gate private drives in the area, and then widen the roadways. As mentioned, they're not really up to our current standards, and do full depth roadway improvements. So the estimated cost in 2018 was approximately $184,000 to just do the roadway improvements. It didn't include, to my knowledge, any of consultant fees or anything that would be associated with implementing of a quiet zone. So since, obviously there's been work done since 2018, we've had multiple discussions with BNSF over the last probably 6 months. We were able to schedule an on-site review, which is required as any part of, no matter any changes we want to make to a rail crossing, we're required to meet with the railroad owner operator, and then also the State Department of Transportation. So our Public Works Department did go out and meet with them on site on September 5th. Topics discussed include quiet zones, only mitigate train horns. They do not necessarily eliminate the need for crossing bells. Crossing bells, again, are activated to protect pedestrians and bicyclists. Horns are intended to protect vehicles. Road closure must be permanent in order to permanently close a crossing. So what we have now, could consider permanent, but it being a gate with emergency access and pedestrian access is really, in the eyes of the railroad, considered temporary. And then there are a myriad of options, which we'll discuss here on the next slide, of potential mitigation alternatives. We're really looking at 4. These have different costs. They're going to have different challenges. But there are sort of 4 viable options if there was interest in creating a quiet zone in the area. We could permanently close Lake Crest Drive to vehicles and pedestrians. And so this would, we don't have specific design plans at this point. We potentially look at adding some concrete barriers, ripping up asphalt, and then we would have to make sure that, potentially look at the gate access so that we really prohibit and discourage that what we currently have for the pedestrian and bike access. This would allow us to create both the quiet zone as well as removal of the crossing gates and bells. And so alternatively to that one is under option 2, looking at closing it to vehicles only, but maintaining pedestrian or bicycle access. Still looking at probably some vehicle barricades, but allowing for pedestrian access across those tracks. It would mean that the crossing bells and gates have to stay unless we decided that a pedestrian bridge was an option. And so in that instance, those could go away. Option 3 would be to implement supplemental safety standards. Those can be what were recommended in the 2018 study, or we can do further analysis to see if maybe there are better alternatives now that the road is temporarily closed. Again, that's sort of undefined at this point, but is something we could look at. It allows for quiet zone implementation, but we're probably still looking at maintaining the bells and gates for that at-grade crossing. And then number 4 really doesn't include implementing a quiet zone, but there are noise barriers, which does not restrict train horns or crossing bells, but just looks at mitigating noise to adjacent residents. Of course, nothing comes without challenges, especially when we're talking about federal rules and regulations. So there will still be train horns active in the general area. I think you'll probably have heard and will hear from residents that say their primary focus is this crossing, with understanding that there still will be some sound, but not nearly as close as the Lake Crest crossing, at least specific to the Riverview subdivision. Also looking, again, there are still some unknowns. This is just a very high level overview. As far as cost, timing, and feasibility are going to vary based on which direction is chosen. Unknown potential impacts on future development of 43rd Street. We've looked at potentially at some unknown time connecting it to Woodland instead of Lake Crest. Also, maybe it doesn't even make sense and 43rd Street just has a turnaround and never connects to the rest of the roadway network. So just again, something to think about, kind of an unknown with that piece, at least along 43rd Street. And then weighing community priorities, quality of life for the area residents, and also, those people that do actively bike and walk it today, and then connected transportation network. And so really tonight was just intended to provide an overview, an update on what we found out since this issue was brought back up by residents. We can, if you would like to, if there's general sort of consensus or direction, that basically that can give staff direction to further investigate some of these options or one option, or we can always just have questions and discussion this evening and bring this back at a city council meeting after you have some time to digest all this information and provide direction at a future council meeting. So I am here for questions. I believe we do have some residents that have signed up to speak, and so happy to answer those.
All right, Lauren, thank you so much for the presentation. Good job. Laid it out clearly. It is a complicated issue. I'll start with my questions since it's my ward and then open it up. First of all, one thing you did not touch on, and I assume you haven't gauged yet, but no estimated costs associated with each one?
Or we have not.
Can you say which one would be the most expensive? Or would one be very expensive?
One of the reasons we don't have cost yet is we don't know what the railroad would accept as a permanent closure. Whether we do have to rip up asphalt in addition to barricades, whether they require, we just don't have that information. We do have the one number of the to make the quiet zone with the vehicles from 2018 at $184,000. You could probably double that now, but that's about as far as we got on cost.
Okay, so we can't really figure cost into our discussion tonight. Makes it hard to know like which one would be the most expensive or.
I mean, in general, I would say engineered solutions and construction typically are going to cost more than going through just essentially a process that would require sort of less, basically anything that needs to be constructed is going to cost more.
Because like when I look at it here, number one, doesn't look like we would have to do a whole lot other than maybe some additional barriers and things like that. Two requires, I mean, it couldn't require a pedestrian bridge. Three would require all those supplemental safety measures that you listed out from 2018. I assume those two would cost more than one, but okay, thank you. And then I wanted you to speak a little bit more to emergency access. It said that that's not a concern in our packet. But I know that we wanted to keep it open previously. So can you speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah, so I mean, I obviously can't speak to the conversations that were held in 2018.
Oh.
At that point, Lake Crest was still being used actively for to have access onto 43rd Street for the industrial pieces that are further northwest of there. We did meet very recently with our police and fire departments as well as public works, and there was not a concern with closing it to emergency access. Understanding that if anything does in the future develop along 43rd Street, you know, there could potentially be additional fire safety measures that would need to be in place with only having 43rd Street as the access point. But they are agreeable to having that closed permanently.
Okay, thank you. And then my third and last question was, you just alluded to it, but regarding future development. So it's my understanding that if future development goes in, we could either, as part of the development, require them to include a turnaround, or we could choose to go all the way through to Woodland and connect with Woodland.
That's correct.
So future development, because I don't want to completely limit folks that own land down there for the future, but that doesn't seem to be a major concern. I think we've got to work around for both of those.
There are options in that area.
Thank you. Okay. Are there council questions for staff? Angela?
Thank you, Kurt. Yes, I had you, just going back to what you said that it goes through there 4 times a day.
Correct.
Is that correct? And then, do you know what time is, I don't know what times of the day. Does it differ every day, or?
I don't have that information. The crossing, the inventory doesn't provide us. It's just that those broad 12-hour windows. I'm sure
Okay.
some of the residents could probably attest to some of those times. I do know it's middle of the night sometimes.
Okay. And then you said it's like 15 to 20 seconds
Ahead of the crossing.
Okay, so when and the other question I had too is, if you do close the road, and I know Kurt mentioned the turnarounds and things like that, but does that, this is kind of a silly question maybe, but I'm kind of asking because I don't know how trains work and how they divert that, right, with their routes. So how does that work then? Do they find another go through or something like that? I mean, if that's permanently closed and they don't go through there at all,
So
where do they like reroute it, I
the
guess?
train stays on the same line.
Okay,
We have no authority to tell them
tell them where we're gonna
yeah.
go.
So
Okay,
it's just the vehicles and potentially pedestrians and bicyclists can't cross it.
okay,
So it's as if it doesn't exist any longer, as people can pass through it.
okay, but the train still goes through there.
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
I just
You
want to
just don't
make
have
sure I
to-
understood that correctly, like if
Yeah.
it diverted or something, because I'm like trying to figure this out. So the train is still gonna go through there,
Yes,
and it's just not gonna be blowing the horns.
correct.
Okay, and then the bells will also be eliminated, or they would still go off?
If we
If-
close Lake
yeah.
Crest.
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to clarify
Only
that.
if we completely
is-
permanently close Lake Crest Drive.
Right, if it's permanently closed.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's it.
Any other questions from council? Tony?
So Lauren, thank you for your presentation. It's complicated, obviously. There's one line of tracks. There's no siding between Lake Crest and going westbound currently.
That's correct.
It's just a one line. Yeah, okay. I'm just wondering whether or not if there was a siding there, and then they're backing up trains and using that as a switching, but it's really a slow down area before they hit Argentine. Okay,
Yes.
gotcha. Have we had any thoughts in their staff, ever had any discussions about trying to access I'll call it the Jefferson Street exit into the private area off of the landscape company, and the name is now escaping me.
Hermes?
Hermes, thank you. Hermes, can we take 43rd all the way down to Hermes instead of going down to Woodland? Or do we split their land?
I mean, that's a potential if we're looking at connecting it. We haven't, that's just hypothetical, the way we've looked at the Woodland connection, because we don't have right of way basically to get between 47th and 43rd currently for Woodland. And so what that looks like, is it more of like a frontage road that sort of runs on the opposite side of the railroad? Does it pass the railroad, and maybe there's an opportunity for us to create a new connection point to Hermes? That's all kind of up for play at this point, just because there's not been really the
A deep dive
opportunity
into
for
it?
those
Okay,
improvements.
yeah. I realized that it would obviously make 43rd Street, a lot longer to get down there, but from a safety standpoint, and allow access through that commercial development that can continue in the north side of 43rd in that area. I think in the long run, it behooves us to try and keep that open. So kind of caught in the middle, and I understand the Ward 3 residents wanted to quiet that zone down. So yeah, it's tough. So there's no way to do a quiet zone just for horns themselves unless we permanently close Lake Crest. Is that what I heard?
No.
To vehicles only.
So option 3, if we.
Which would encourage, which would also be emergency vehicles, so.
That's correct. So essentially, that would put in place additional improvements at that crossing. For instance, what was recommended in 2018 was the medians and some enhancements to just kind of the layout of the roadway. So we could do that. That is an option. The cost at that time was estimated was $184,000. And we can do those improvements. They wouldn't necessarily at least be used at this time, because the roadway's temporarily closed, and sort of preempt any future access, say if the roadway opened back up.
It would not quiet the bells.
Yeah, it would not, yeah. The best way to do that would be to hook up the Woodland and then permanently close Lake Crest on the south side.
That is a future connection point.
I guess that's probably what you're gonna want to see your costs from.
Yeah, if what I would lean toward, and again, not knowing costs, we're very cost focused as a council, and as a city. So it's really hard to give a lot of direction without cost, but just they're looking at this, I'm guessing one might be the cheapest route. There's a reason, knowing the area, I'd say there's a reason why we chose to temporarily close it. And part of that is that it's not used. It's not utilized. And the Lakeview residents didn't want a lot of traffic going through there anyway. The 3 concerns I have if we do a full closure would be, number 1, emergency access. Fire has said that's not an issue. Number 2, future development off 43rd. And I think the answer tonight has been that there are workarounds for that as we move forward. The 3rd, and I know this will impact some people, is some pedestrians and some bicyclists are going to want to go down there. But it was mentioned in the report that would limit their access to future parks and things like that. And I just don't see a future park going in there. It's in a flood zone. There's really nothing down there. And I'm not sure it's the best place for pedestrians to be hanging out anyway. So at first blush, I would lean toward number 1, but again, not knowing costs. So I want to hear from residents, but just before we move on, any more council questions or comments? Okay. Did anyone sign up to make comments, Colin?
Yeah, we had one pre-register, Jason Ray.
Jason? If you'll state your address, and then when you're done, Sign your address as well, your name and address. Thank you.
Good evening, Jason Ray, 4504 Brown Ridge Drive. And I'm the dummy that moved near the train and now wants to talk about it. So that's why I'm here. I really want to thank Lauren. She's done so much work on this and just been great to work with and talk to. And it's been awesome. I prepared a speech so that I don't melt into the floor because I don't like public speaking, but I'm going to divert because of a bunch of the questions you guys had. So the memo talks about only 4 trains per day. That's 100% not accurate. I don't know where the FRA is getting that from. There's 2 Amtrak trains a day, one at 6 in the morning and one at 11 at night. Honestly, it's a quieter horn. It's not as big of a deal. It's fast. It's done. Some days there isn't any trains. That's extremely rare. On average, I would say 5 to 6 freight trains. And I've counted as many as 12. So a lot more than the 4 they're saying. And as far as them parking on the tracks, so they'll park there for sometimes it's 20, 30 minutes, which isn't a huge deal. Sometimes it's 2-3 hours. They were there until about 11 o'clock Saturday night. And that dinging is an electronic bell, and it's just ding to ding to ding to ding, and it's loud. I mean, it's loud. It reverberates throughout 2 neighborhoods. And then I also wanted to give a little context on just the noise levels of the horn, because we talked about the other crossings and how they would still be, the horns would still be going. I completely understand. I'm a captain on the fire department in Lawrence, and one of the things we do is we do tests on fire alarm system for decibel levels. We do it like on a new apartment complex. We'll go to where the head's going to hit the pillow. Chief Sands will say all my numbers are right here, because I'm pretty sure they are. So we're looking for 75 decibels to wake somebody up and get them out of that place, right? I did a test in my bedroom, and I get 84 decibels, and that was at nighttime. So it's louder than the horn going off, and I'm sure everyone's heard one of those. Pretty loud. The horns at the other crossings, yeah, that's ambient noise. You do hear it, but it's not a non-issue. What else? Yeah, just going back to that study back in 2018, the risk was already below the national threshold. And now we have support from police and fire to close the crossing. I really do think option number 1 is the best. It eliminates all the noise. As far as the pedestrians and bicycles, yeah, there may be people I can't see that if people are using that. When that train stops for 3 hours and it's 1.5 miles or 2 miles long, and somebody's just walked across, that's a long walk back. So I don't think many people utilize that. I know my wife says I would never do that because if I don't want to get stuck with a dog, So yeah, I would urge move forward with some kind of a solution, bare minimum being the quiet zone. But really that first option of closing the crossing there would be my number 1 option. And again, I want to say I appreciate your time and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, that was all the people signed up. Is there anybody else that would like to speak? Come on up. If you'll state your name and address, and then when you're done, you can write your name and address as well. Thank you.
Inside your house that you measured the sound? Did you do any measurements outside?
I haven't because I know it's loud.
Okay. My name is Tom Wheeler, and I'm at 21401 West 45th Terrace. I'm about 1,000 yards or 1,000 feet from the train crossing. And I really didn't come here prepared to talk, but I'll just say that when I'm outside and you can hear the trains coming, and then when the horn blows, it is startling and it is ear piercing. It is very loud. I don't know. I didn't do the measurements. Jason said that he did it inside his house at 84 decibels. I believe that. I think outside it's probably close to 100 decibels. I haven't measured it, but it's very loud. And I'm 1,000 feet or maybe a little bit more from the train crossing, and there are 5 to 10 homes. There's probably 10 homes that are closer to that train crossing than I am. And I cannot imagine living in those homes or being outside and listening to that horn. It is really deafening. And as Jason mentioned, on Saturdays and especially Sundays, the trains stop and are waiting to get into the yard, and they will be there for 2-3 hours. And the bell is just ding, 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 ding for 2 or 3 hours. So I'm really appreciate the city looking at doing something on this. Our neighborhood's not that old, but a lot of homes have been built recently, and so it's become more residential than rural. So anyway, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak? And I will say, as was mentioned, we got a number of emails on this as well. So any other council comments, having heard from the residents? Angela.
Thank you, Kurt. Yes, thank you guys for coming out. We really appreciate it. That's interesting to hear that, you know, some of these trains are coming through that many times a day and then sometimes not at all. And it does sound like it's very loud, and that would be, yeah, very startling to say the least, especially inside your home. So I think, you know, we probably just need to look at this, Lauren, maybe a little bit more. We talked about the quiet zone implementation. I just don't know all what that entails, right, with the railroad and everything. So is that something we have to go back to the railroad and kind of discuss with them exactly how that all works?
So I think the important point we need to go away with is, does the governing body want to entertain closing Lakeview? I think that's the central piece here.
Okay.
If that's going to be what generates the interest from landowners, from bicyclists, from pedestrians. That would then allow us to start working with somebody who does this on. The reason that there's no cost for number one is we don't know if that's barricades. If they say, no, you can't have pavement 100 feet either side of it, and you have to plant vegetation, so you can't have a future roadway. But I think the most important thing is, do we have a consensus that this governing body wants to look at, number one, which is closing Lake Crest? And that will generate, as you know, more emails to you in opposition or in support of that. So if there's that, then that gives us the consensus to maybe explore further, what does permanently closed mean to the railroad? That's really the only group that matters what permanently closed means.
Obviously, we'll have to get somewhat of a consensus here. I would be in favor of looking into that road, because we can always change course. We don't have to approve it. If people come out in droves and love walking down there, which I don't expect, but I might be wrong. We don't necessarily have to continue down that path. But for me, these are two very different areas. I mean, 43rd is very agriculture and industrial. And then you could basically wall it off, and then you've got the neighborhood to the north with the grade school and the whole suburbia. And the two are very different. So cutting off the access, if emergency is okay with it, right there between the two, again, if it doesn't affect future development either, I just don't see a huge downside. I'll preserve the right to change my mind if we get a lot of resident feedback the other way. But I'd be interested in going down that road, but it matters more what the majority of us want to do.
Well, and I think, sorry, I didn't mean to.
I'm done.
Just because we were still discussing it, but that just to kind of segue into the other part of it too, obviously the cost, right? So we want to look at the cost and see what is the most feasible. Not that, you know, obviously the citizens, we want that as well to be something important, but I do worry about people saying, yeah, coming back and we don't want that road closed, and we want to walk over there and things like that. So, I mean, maybe one end to look at just, I know, are the crossing, what are the decimals? Did we have that? How high the crossing bells, how loud those are? Maybe you guys, do you hear those as well?
10 or something.
I'd just be curious, like how loud those are. You know, I mean, like if we didn't have the horns, but we had the crossing bells, like what the difference would be in the decibels on that.
It's an easy number to get for you.
Okay, maybe we can get that information just out of curiosity. So we would have that maybe as an option too. just to look at in case we had a lot of people come back and like I said, I don't know what it would cost to obviously build a pedestrian bridge or any of those things we'd have to look at. But at least it gives us maybe a couple of options. Those are my comments.
Tony? Thank you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I guess I'll play the Debbie Downer on this one. Thinking of the area, the most logical thing in my mind is if we made a connection over to Woodland and then closed Lake Crest Drive completely, obviously. But you're looking at some pretty expensive land to be able to develop a street eastbound from Lake Crest to Woodland and then up to attach Woodland Drive. So, you're compounding your cost upon cost. And then whether or not that even solves the problem with the railroad. And so I totally get that. But then the other half of that story is from Lake Crest all the way to essentially the Amazon facilities and or Golden State Foods is, where Old Castle is packaging. We already turned down some commercial development in there before, unless it's going to be a light warehouse commercial development. They've got to help us put in the street for 43rd Street. Then you've got that section from whatever the commercial development is all the way to Woodland. So it's an expensive road to do. So you're looking at a lot of money. Then the question I would have also would be off of Woodstock, is that area built out? Are we around Broadmoor, Pet Retreat and Woodstock that now you're gonna impact residents in that neighborhood that have a quiet neighborhood as well without a major road going into their backyard. So you're gonna get a lot of pushback from whichever angle you begin to look at if you're gonna close Lake Crest Drive permanently. And I voted in favor of temporarily closing it, so it's allowed for emergency access. That's the hard part. So I think it's going to become pretty cost prohibitive. But if we want to go down the road to look at it, to me, the most logical thing would be to connect up Woodland Drive all the way to 43rd, go around to all the neighborhoods.
You'd have a
And then
new
you could open
crossing
it
at
up
Woodland.
for commercial crossing at that location. You've already got bells that are being blown at that and crossing today. And now do you create a new problem with that other neighborhood? So yeah, you're in a tough spot. Bought near a railroad track and you have horns. It's kind of like the airport was there and you bought a home near the airport. And so it's a tough spot. I get it. But cost is going to be prohibitive. So I think options in the long run is what's going to be needed. So stating the obvious, it's the elephant in the room or the gorilla in the room. And I get the residents concerned, but I also think there needs to be, a look at what's good for the long-term development in the area and safety. Thank you.
I appreciate your comments. The option would be either to take it down to Woodland or create a turnaround, correct? Yeah. Okay. Anybody else?
I'll just add real quick. So we could just kind of bring in a little bit further refined options forward. We could look at a proposed road closure plan, potentially reaching out probably to the adjacent owners. There's two owners that, as mentioned, own along 43rd and Lake Crest. We've talked about just internally, very high level, as leaving essentially 43rd potentially intact, but maybe at some point the barriers are actually on Lake Crest. And so it still gives private access along 43rd to those owners, potentially is less of that sort of feel if they're looking at selling their piece, but there still could potentially be access on 43rd, and this looks more like a Lake Crest closure instead. So we can kind of sort of put together potential options on that. Again, it doesn't include official railroad approval. And then we could potentially look at, because we do have at least some solution that is an engineered solution, which was option 3. Sorry, let me pull it up here. Of maybe trying to get a cost update estimate on what was 184,000, still leaving Lake Crest at least temporarily closed and maybe just getting an update on the engineered costs. That kind of makes sense to come back with. So like one, it's kind of a mix of looking at potential road closure plans as either option 1 or 2. And then 3, looking at maybe just getting some cost estimates for what was previously recommended for those, what are called the supplemental safety measures.
Recognizing that that could be $250,000 and the bells still go off.
Correct.
Personally, I'm not interested in the third option, but I guess we need other people to weigh in.
Thank you, Kurt. Yeah, I mean, I guess the other thing is like if they're sitting there, so when they're sitting there, and I don't know how, obviously I don't live there, so I don't know. I live pretty far away, so I don't hear the trains very much. So I'm just trying to understand it, right? Other than maybe getting a tent and sleeping out there or something. So when they're sitting there, do they make any sort of noise? I mean, I'm just asking, like, how
Whole
much
time.
noise is being made the whole time?
What's the bell?
The trains don't have to sound their horn if they're sitting there.
Right.
The gates themselves are deployed when they're sitting there or within a certain few feet of the crossing. And if the gates are down, that means the bells are going.
So they're going the entire 3 hours?
Yes, and there's no way for, based on federal regulations,
Okay.
time those out.
That sounds, yeah, I would love to know what those decibels are, because I mean, I think 3 hours of like a train sitting there, and having those go off sounds really irritating to me personally. So that's the only thing. I mean, with the 3, that would be hard because if those are still going to be going off all that time. And I don't know how many times a day that is. Can we get more of it? Do you think we could ask them? 'Cause it seems like they're saying 4 times a day, but then the residents are sitting here saying, well, these are going off, 12 times a day sometimes. And could we get a better number on that by chance?
We can request that from BNSF. The inventory form that I got the numbers from was from, I think, just the federal FRA just goes out one day and does an inventory. So that's probably where that day there were 4 trains. So we can request that from BNSF, certainly.
That would be great. Thank you, Lauren.
Tony?
Yeah, Lauren, refresh my memory. We implemented a quiet zone I know with other staff members, maybe about 4 years ago. And a lot of work was done on this subject, and I know you were around at that time, so you're probably preview to some of those. Was that off of the Woodland crossing line, or was that the one east of town off of, is it 75th?
Thank you. Yeah, so we have implemented a number of quiet zones,
Right.
goodness. So there are, just kind of going through the report, silence 3, one at 59th, one at 73rd and 75th. So those were primarily the ones that run on the spine through, on the Emporia subdivision. Yes, and then 55th Street was also quieted in 2018.
Yeah, and I bring that up because I think that gives us confidence to know that our staff can intelligently speak with the railroad, come up with some good cost options and give us some avenues to look at it at future time. So look forward to seeing, some future options.
Yeah, and I think it also shows the precedent that, I mean, clearly you can say that they bought a house next to a railroad, so it's going to be loud. On the other hand, the city's chosen to develop all of these areas, and we're getting property taxes and everything else from it. And the precedent's there that we've gone and worked to get a quiet zone in the past, certainly. So I don't think it's an outlandish ask. So I don't know that you're getting quite what you need, though. Not enough people are speaking up. I think it's kind of hard to chair this but I'm gathering that there's enough interest in at least seeing what it would cost and what it would entail to do a full closure. I see people nodding. Okay. And then you got enough? No, let's move on. I'll close when I get a yes. I've been in sales long enough. Did anybody else have anything before we move on? Okay. Thank you, Lauren. Good job. And thank you for the residents that spoke. We'll have to wait and see where this thing goes, I think. Item number 2 is a discussion on e-bikes and motorized scooters. City Manager Paul Kramer will kick off the discussion. Paul.
Thank you, Council President Nappen. I'm going to read the quick background and then kind of go through what we're going to do tonight, how the discussion will go. So in recent years, Shawnee and other Johnson County communities have seen a noticeable increase in both the number and sophistication of e-bikes and scooters, with many models capable of reaching higher speeds than in the past. The growth has prompted cities to explore ways to balance the benefits of these devices with the need to protect public safety. The focus is on safeguarding not only the riders, but the pedestrians and motorists who share the same streets, sidewalks, and trails. As part of the discussion tonight, staff will review existing ordinances, identify potential updates to the city's regulations, and outline strategies for managing e-bikes and scooter use in Shawnee. The proposed approach emphasizes education as the first step, ensuring that riders and the public understand the rules and safety expectations while keeping enforcement as an available option if efforts provide insufficient. Just so you all know a little background, Councilmember Nappen is the council president, has been pushing to get this on council committee for quite a while. We've heard from HOAs, we've heard from individual residents throughout the community as this has become a bigger issue. And if you follow the news, you'll see that other cities have taken some small changes to what they have on the books and some a little bit more drastic regulations. I'm going to introduce our presenters tonight. So we have Lena Bellman is the city's prosecutor, who's going to go through existing ordinances and maybe some proposed changes, really focusing around clarification of language that we have as we try to adapt our regulations to capture the conditions that we see today. And then, of course, a discussion with Sam Larson, our police chief, about education and enforcement and what they're seeing, the PD seeing out on the street. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Lena to start through what we have on the books now and maybe how we could improve those going forward.
Good evening. So we have a number of existing ordinances that define bicycles, electric assisted bicycles, and motorized bicycles. There's a lot of text on these slides, so I'm going to jump ahead to a chart that we've prepared to break this down. However, if you have specific questions about what the ordinances say, I'm happy to go back a couple of slides and we can talk more in depth on those. Essentially, with these definitions in our ordinances, bicycle is going to be your standard human powered, so no motor or electric propelled devices. The rules of the road apply to those. We're talking about being able to ride them on sidewalks, roadways, trails, just a standard bicycle. The electric assisted bicycle and the motorized bicycle are easiest to distinguish when you consider the speed capabilities of those. With our electric assisted bicycles, those are capped at 20 miles an hour. Whereas a motorized bicycle could go up to 30 miles per hour. The difference there is also in what's required. So if you are driving an electric assisted bicycle, you're not required to have a driver's license. You're not required to have vehicle registration on that. However, for a motorized bicycle, those things are required. And there is a helmet law in place for anyone under the age of 18. So this doesn't really answer what about scooters. We do not have a ordinance in the city that specifically talks about scooters. However, the motorized skateboard definition, if we ignore the title, does cover what would be considered a scooter. So that definition talks about any self-propelled device with a motor or engine and a dock on which a person may ride and at least 2 wheels in contact with the ground. So if we're ignoring the skateboard portion of that, because it doesn't require the absence of a handlebar, we could easily apply this ordinance to scooters. And then with this ordinance, we have an accompanying ordinance that prohibits motorized skateboards being driven on city streets. So essentially those are limited to just being used on the sidewalks. If we made no changes today, we are essentially looking at having our bicycles defined for sidewalks and roadways, our e-bikes and motorized bikes being limited to just roadways, But we are left with no section of our code that is truly devoted to scooters unless we're using that skateboard portion of our code. I'm happy to talk a little bit more about what our proposed language would look like. But before we get there, I'd like to kind of cover what some of our violations and penalties are in place right now, so you can kind of get an understanding if we were to modify our ordinances, what we would be looking at as far as consequences if they're violated. So as of right now, the penalties we have in place are going to be traffic infractions. It's going to depend on how much that traffic infraction costs if a person is found guilty with what they're charged with, really. So speed can start at $45 and go up from there. We have fines in place for if you're driving a motor-driven cycle without a helmet or a headlamp, I'm sorry, if you're driving a vehicle on a sidewalk. All of those fines vary, but what we would ultimately be looking at is an ordinance that would be a traffic infraction that would carry a fine. And the court costs are $23.50, generally speaking, for these offenses. So if we wanted to devote an ordinance that covers scooters, this would be our proposed language. To simplify things, the thought would be to, rather than creating an entirely new chapter that covers scooters, would just be to include that in motorized skateboards so that if an officer is on scene, it's easier to navigate and see that that definition could apply to scooters. We're also proposing changing it from 2 wheels in contact with the ground to 1 wheel, so that if we're in a situation where someone has a motorized unicycle, we're covered on that front as well. The accompanying ordinance that prohibits motorized skateboards from being driven on the street would also be amended with this proposal to add that scooter and unicycle language as well. And then to clarify, we would not be prohibiting them from crossing the street if they were, driving through a neighborhood and needed to pass the street to connect to another sidewalk. As far as other options, if the preference would be to completely disallow scooters from sidewalks and streets, an argument could be made that a scooter, or an electric scooter, I should say, could be defined as a vehicle under our current ordinances. So we do have avenues if there was a desire from the council to disallow the operation of motorized scooters on streets or sidewalks to do that. But I understand that that's not an enforcement tool that's currently being recommended by our police department. And so with that, I'll turn this over to Chief Larson for his department overview and recommendations.
What's that? Go back one. What's that final point? If a motorized scooter, they're only allowed on roadways, but before what I was seeing, the skateboard anyway, was on sidewalks.
So the final point, if we were to define a motorized scooter as a vehicle, they would be disallowed on the sidewalks. So we could argue it kind of as it's a vehicle, so it can't be on sidewalks, but also it has a specific ordinance. Does that make more sense?
Yeah, thanks.
All right, Sam Larson, Chief of Police. For the police department's perspective on this, and to clarify one thing she mentioned about the citations that could be into the crimes the ordinances that we could write, that would be to the writer of the bicycle, motorized scooter, or powered unicycle. I saw a couple of you chuckle. I do expect you to be writing those when you're going door to door and come election season. So as far as the police department goes, calls for service, we really haven't had many of those. I know some of you may live in neighborhoods that you've seen those. We've had a couple calls, not too many. They're hard to track. We do have one resident who's called a few times about an issue she had with a scooter rider on a sidewalk, but that was one person. So far, the way we handle these are complaint-based. As Lena mentioned, there's some clarification that needs to be made on this, and I'll talk about that here in a second, but it's a complaint-based system. So if we do get a complaint, we'll go out and handle it. That doesn't mean we're gonna pull somebody over. Doesn't mean we're gonna write a ticket. Doesn't mean we're gonna take them to jail and take their scooter. Just means if we get a complaint, we'll go out and check for them and see how they're doing that. Like a lot of stuff we do at the police department, we do want it to be an education-based enforcement. Again, meaning we're not gonna go out and write tickets. We prefer to educate the riders. That's a big thing on this. Potentially some issues we've seen are parents buying these for their children, or the kids save up the money and buy them, and they say, go to school. And there's no education as far as a parent saying, you need to stop at the side of the street, don't cross the street without stopping and looking both ways. The child thinks they can go 28 miles an hour and just roll down the street, and we have some crashes. We have had 3 crashes um, involving scooters, electric bikes. Two of them were in the eastern part of the city. One of them was out west of K7. Very minor injuries on those. One of those two scooters actually ran into each other. The front one stopped too quickly and the second one was following too closely and rear-ended the other one. So our response to this is that we want to make the standards very easy so that all of us can understand, council can understand, the police department can understand, the parents and the kids, more importantly, can understand that. So something that we were talking about here is scooters on the side, as far as e-bikes go and e-scooters, scooters on the sidewalk, bikes on the streets. So again, something we're going to need to work on that. And that's something that we, the police department, are going to try to work with the school district, HOAs and others to do, is to educate those children that have scooters to be good stewards on the sidewalk. It's not your sidewalk. You need to share it with the people walking on the sidewalk. So trying to get that education stuff out on that. We do plan on working with the school district. I know DeSoto was going to put out some material last week or this week, I believe it was, but we've asked them to hold off while we can figure out what we're going to do with this. And then we'll work with them on a brochure, and the city and them can work on that and get that out to their students. When we do decide on what we're going to do with this, we would like to educate on our social media, on our favorite Nextdoor, Facebook, all the stuff that the city does on that, and get the word out, create a brochure that could go to HOAs that they could send to their residents and all that stuff. To educate what's legal, what's not. Again, following the rules of the road. You saw that chart over there that talks about, that's not listed as one of the things for the e-bikes and the scooters is of not following, I'm sorry, the scooters, not following the rules of the road. We want children here riding these to follow the rules of the road to keep them safe. Again, we want to focus on education, voluntary compliance. I don't think you as a council want our police officers pulling over 10-year-olds riding a scooter. We don't want to do that. I don't think our community wants us to do that. We want to keep them safe, but it's not what, we don't need to be pulling over kids for that stuff. So it would be to educate them. They may not know it. Educate them on what the rules of the road are and what they need to do. So something that these are some enforcement tools that are not recommended, make them illegal in the city. I don't think we should do that. I think they should be allowed as technology keeping up. We all had some kind of transportation, whether it be a bike or a scooter or whatever we had when we were younger. This is technology keeping up with that or catching up, blowing past the, potentially blowing past the statutes that are written on this and the ordinances that are written on it. So that's a possibility, is make them illegal. Nobody can use them anywhere in the city. We could be very aggressive and have our officers out there stopping children riding these. I don't think that's personally a good use of our police resources. And I'm not asking our people to do that today. If they are allowed, again, do a proactive enforcement of those scooters and e-bikes, and then have our officers do that. So those are the things for the police department specific. Again, we've had 3 crashes, and Sergeant Sherman, time of our traffic unit, is here. If you have any additional questions about traffic stuff, if I can answer it, he surely can.
No, I appreciate it. And that's exactly what I was hoping for. I know we were laughing a little bit, but the truth is, in our ward anyway, these things have proliferated greatly. They're everywhere. And I've had a number of people mention it to me, mostly out of the fear that they're going to hit a kid. And there might be only 3 incidents so far, but one incident could end up being really bad. And personally, when I'm walking the dog, I'm like, they fly up on you, and I'm like, I'm either going to get hit or you're going to get bit, one or the other. And so what happened was my HOA asked us, what do we have? We need to educate, which is the goal, I think. And we found we really don't have a lot yet. And we hadn't codified scooters because it's a newer thing. So I'm glad we're having the discussion, even though it is kind of funny when you're talking about unicycles. But it worries me, and I think it's mostly out of concern that somebody's going to get hurt. So with that said, what questions of staff does council have, or comments? Angela.
Thank you, Chief. Hey, do you know how fast do those scooters go?
By the way, I don't recommend Googling this because you get ads for scooters for like 3 weeks. So they can go up to 30, like 35 miles an hour. The scooters and the e-bikes are different things, 28 to 30 plus miles an hour for that little scooter. And to clarify the unicycle thing, if you've seen what's called a one wheel, think of a skateboard with a wheel in the middle where you balance.
Oh yeah.
So that technically is it's not like a unicycle like you see in a circus or something, but it is It is literally a one wheel with a skateboard on top of it. So it's,
Yeah.
the wheel's like this big. So
Then do you know, like because I mean, I've seen them, my kids don't have one, but do you like to slow those down? Like, let's say you had to stop really quickly. Do they
most
stop?
of them have brakes.
Okay, like,
Some of the less expensive ones have like a foot brake where you put your foot on the back to slow down, but most of the, what I would call the more expensive ones that go 30+ miles an hour have a handbrake like a motorcycle would have. I don't know if they're disc brakes or what they are, but they have brakes on them.
and then sorry, I just one more question, like if they're in like a development, because I've had the same situation where I've started to back up and like some kid will just come flying by on one of those down the street. And so in a development like that, how do you enforce that as much, right? Because you're out probably mostly on the major streets. And what do we do? I guess, is that something, I know education has been brought up several times, but is that something HOAs can enforce as well? Does anyone know that?
They can't enforce.
Okay.
ordinances.
I
They
didn't
could- you
know
could
if there
send
was
something
like
out.
some sort of
I guess the HOA could set a fine amount if the HOA can do that. I don't know that, but that would be a good thing. I know we've had officers who have said the exact same thing as they're backing out of their driveway and kids go flying by. So it's part of the education. They need to pay more attention, be aware of your surroundings. I don't know if they're thinking of going to school and their math test they had today or what, but pay attention to what's going on around them as they're riding their
Mhm.
scooter or wherever they're going, because they do go so fast. You have to, at time distance for the time for them to travel, you look away, you look back, they've already traveled a big distance in a
Right.
short amount of time.
I would be in favor of like, especially helmets too, because I see a lot of the kids riding them without helmets. And I would also be in favor, Kurt, of, I think the sidewalk, not riding in the streets for sure. That would be one of my, and then, but I don't know what you do with the walkers too. So maybe people have comments on that. Like if they are going that, I guess we could set a speed limit of some sorts, but
Yeah, that's, I believe on the one of the slides was a speed limit on the sidewalk is a max of something.
We had concerns about enforcing a speed limit on the sidewalk because to our knowledge, the police department's equipment is not calibrated in order for us to be able to prove the speed of a scooter, whereas we could do that for a vehicle.
The 10-year-old wouldn't know it. I mean,
Their
Is
attorney
my-
parent may know that.
my thing is, I mean, I'm not usually a get off my lawn old guy type. Truth is, I would love to have a scooter. They look really fun. But the problem is 10-year-olds don't know the rules of the road and probably don't have a good judgment either. But I see them fly right across the street without even looking. And I haven't seen it a lot, but I've seen it enough that it worries me a lot. So any other comments? Jeannie?
I'll just say I was in my neighborhood yesterday and there is a road that dead ends. 69th Street becomes a dead end at one point, but there was a kid on a motorized bike and a kid on a scooter racing each other down the middle of 69th Street for about 4 blocks. Had no clue anybody was around. The kid on the bikes doing the back and forth and the kid on the scooters. And, if anybody had backed out of a driveway, those kids would have not been aware at all. But when that's happening in your small little residential neighborhood, if you don't know who the kids belong to, there's really not a whole lot you can do.
Tony?
Yeah, my home lives on an incline or downcline, however you want to say that. And the sidewalks is used as a raceway for these kids on these scooters. But we know where they end up in the cul-de-sac and they're racing and having a good time. So back in the 70s, it was skateboards and bicycles and ropes, right? And now it's motorized scooters that everybody's chasing each other. I think it's education and anything we do to keep it from being, an illegal activity in our community and just getting the parents and getting the students to understand the rules of the road, and that they're not the only thing out there is the best process to go.
Does the skateboard now require helmets?
It doesn't at this point in time. We did have some brief discussions about potentially including
Do bikes?
expansion to the helm for the motorized bicycles. They're required.
I mean, I'd be in favor of adding helmets. But anyway, whatever we decide, I think the big thing is going to be the brochure or whatever you come up with that we can really push out to schools and HOAs. and ultimately parents.
I don't know that I said this earlier, accurately, or if I said it at all, but in response to that, there is ordinance already in place, but we would do education. If there's a child, a family, or whatever it is, a group of kids that are causing problems, and we continually deal with them, we're gonna eventually write them citations. So we're gonna educate to a point, but at some point, we're gonna have to cite and enforce that, but just wanted to clarify that.
The only other thing that is not addressed in our solution is how fast they do go on the sidewalks. They fly right up on you. And so, again, we're openly saying we're not really gonna enforce a lot. We're not gonna write a lot of tickets. But I don't think having some of these things in the, if you had a speed limit and you had helmets required, and that's in the information, and that's the information the kid is continually getting, I don't know if it'd be a bad thing. I don't know what other folks think. Angela?
Well, as far as this consensus on proposed language changes, I mean, will we put that in there if that's what we all decided as far as helmets and a reduced speed? How would that read exactly?
Those are two things. The speed though, we're not comfortable that we
Okay.
have the ability to enforce a speed. So we wouldn't want to put it in an ordinance. We don't want to put something in an ordinance that we cannot enforce.
But we could enforce, or when I say enforce, I'm sorry, in the ordinance, we could include helmets and we
That would
could
be-
include no scooters on the roadways themselves.
That would be a governing.
Other
body
than,
choice.
like we said, that, if they're crossing your crosswalk or something like that.
So would folks be comfortable with what has been presented tonight and with the addition of helmets required for scooters? Or is there a different direction somebody would like to go? They're not in the skateboard. Not for scooters. Did you have something else, Gene?
We need to clarify the age for the helmets. I know this recommendation is under 18. Is that
Yeah, no.
clarification on that?
Under 18 or under 12 or I don't know. I agree. And in the end, if you're actually going to cite somebody, it's going to be somebody who's causing problems and being an issue and probably a chronic problem. So if you have additional things to cite as something that they're not doing, then that's not a bad thing. Jeannie?
Do we have a motorcycle helmet ordinance in Kansas? They're not required, correct?
Nope. No, but you have to be, I guess, 16 to drive them at least. You're not talking about children.
But if we're gonna say you have to have a helmet on until you're 18 for a skateboard,
Oh,
but you can ride a motorcycle without one at 16, that
good point. Good point.
doesn't quite fit together.
Good point.
The helmet ordinance we have in place right now for the motorized bicycles is 18 and under 18. So if we were wanting to stay consistent with the age to match the motorized bicycles, we could do under 18 for the scooters if we wanted to keep that consistency.
Okay. Everybody good? Do you have what you need?
I'm clear on the expanding. It doesn't seem to be there's much problem with the adding the scooters, unicycles, so we can sort of keep up our language. I'm a little less clear on the helmet. Kind of like to see 4 clear head nods, if you want to see that.
I'd be a yes.
Yeah, in favor of the helmet.
So we've got a
for
majority.
18. Stay consistent.
Yeah, and then of course the education and awareness. And we didn't, the number 2 on there, I think we're okay not doing at this point. That's the considering the motorized scooters and unicycles as a vehicle.
Yeah.
Still want to.
The 2 big things to come out of this is going to be motorized scooters actually being included in our code and the education part, ramping that up. So that becomes much at the forefront of people's minds. You good, Paul?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, maybe we should have done this before. Is there anyone from the audience who would like to speak on this? Okay. If council doesn't have any comments, this item was for informational purposes only. I assume it'll come back to us. And given that, that concludes our agenda. I will accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion.
Oh.
Second.
Second.
Thank you, Angela. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion passes. We are adjourned.